Imagine a fleck of white paint, no larger than a fingernail, drifting silently in the dark. It seems harmless, a mere ghost of a forgotten rocket stage, yet, traveling at 17,500 miles per hour, this tiny speck possesses the kinetic energy of a heavy anvil dropped from a skyscraper. When it strikes the reinforced hull of a crewed spacecraft, it does not bounce. It vaporizes upon impact, blasting a crater through advanced alloys, instantly depressurizing the cabin, and ending a multi-billion-dollar mission in a fraction of a second. This is not a scene from a science fiction thriller. It is the immediate mathematical reality of our heavily trafficked orbital highways. To understand this invisible minefield, we must first examine orbital mechanics, the branch of physics that dictates how objects move under the influence of gravity in the vacuum of space. Objects in low Earth orbit must maintain tremendous velocities to avoid falling back into the atmosphere. At these extreme speeds, the fundamental rules of engagement change. Kinetic energy scales with the square of velocity. Therefore, mass becomes almost secondary to speed. A discarded bolt, a shattered solar panel, or even a frozen droplet of coolant becomes a hypervelocity weapon. We have spent the last 6 decades launching marvels of engineering into the cosmos, but we have treated the orbital environment as an infinite expanse, a limitless ocean capable of absorbing all our technological exhaust. The legacy of that assumption is now a growing shroud surrounding our planet. Since the dawn of the space age, thousands of launches have left behind a staggering accumulation of space debris. This term encompasses any human-made object in orbit that no longer serves a useful function. The catalog includes spent upper rocket stages the size of school buses, defunct satellites drifting aimlessly, and millions of microscopic fragments born from collisions and explosions. We have essentially enclosed Earth in a chaotic, high-speed swarm of junk, creating a fragile ecosystem where every new launch threads a needle through a decaying graveyard of our past achievements. The invisible threat hovering above us directly endangers the invisible infrastructure upon which modern civilization relies. Essential satellite services dictate the rhythm of our daily lives. The Global Positioning System, or GPS, does far more than guide vehicles to a destination. It provides the precise timing signals required to synchronize global financial markets, manage power grids, and route telecommunications. Weather forecasting satellites track catastrophic storms, saving countless lives, while Earth observation platforms monitor crop yields and climate shifts. If a rogue piece of debris shatters a critical node in this network, the resulting blackout would not just disrupt navigation. It could trigger cascading economic failures, paralyze emergency responses, and blind national security apparatuses. This precarious situation brings us to a terrifying threshold known as the Kessler Syndrome. First proposed by NASA scientist Donald Kessler in 1978, this scenario describes a tipping point where the density of objects in low Earth orbit becomes high enough that collisions between objects cause a cascade. Each impact generates a cloud of new debris, which then travels outward to strike other satellites, creating even more fragments in a runaway chain reaction. It is an exponential mathematical nightmare. Once this threshold is crossed, the process becomes self-sustaining. We would not even need to launch another rocket for the orbital environment to become entirely lethal. The shadow of that theoretical cascade now looms over every space agency on the planet. If the Kessler Syndrome reaches its terminal phase, low Earth orbit would become an impenetrable barrier of hypervelocity shrapnel. Humanity would be effectively quarantined on its home world. Future deep space missions to Mars or beyond would be grounded, unable to safely traverse the debris field surrounding Earth. We would lose our orbital infrastructure and our access to the cosmos for generations, perhaps centuries, until atmospheric drag slowly pulled the fragments down to burn up. The very technology meant to expand our horizons would become the cage that locks us in. Acknowledging this existential bottleneck has triggered a frantic pivot in aerospace engineering. Mitigation is no longer sufficient. We have entered the era of active debris removal, a nascent field dedicated to physically extracting dangerous objects from orbit. This is arguably the most complex garbage collection problem in human history. Engineers are not just designing spacecraft to survive the void. They are building autonomous hunters capable of stalking, matching speeds with, and capturing uncooperative, tumbling targets that were never designed to be caught. The engineering tolerances required for these maneuvers are punishingly narrow. The vanguard of this cleanup effort relies on advanced robotic arms. These highly articulated, AI-driven appendages must perform a delicate orbital ballet. A chaser satellite approaches a defunct, spinning rocket body, matching its chaotic rotation precisely. The robotic arm must then reach out and grapple a smooth, fragile surface without pushing the object away or shattering it into 1,000 new pieces. Early prototypes have successfully demonstrated these capture mechanics in controlled tests, proving that autonomous rendezvous and docking with dead mass is physically possible. Yet, scaling this technology to clear thousands of large objects requires a massive leap in onboard computational power and sensory processing. The quiet lab work fueling these robotic captures has unearthed a profound geopolitical friction. A satellite capable of approaching, grappling, and deorbiting a piece of debris is, by definition, a dual-use technology. The exact same mechanism used to clean up a dead weather satellite could theoretically be used to sabotage an adversary's active military communications platform. There is no physical distinction between a peaceful garbage collector and an orbital weapon. This ambiguity paralyzes international cooperation. Nations are deeply suspicious of their rivals deploying highly maneuverable, capture-capable spacecraft, fearing that the guise of environmental cleanup masks the deployment of offensive space assets. Beyond physical grappling, scientists are exploring non-contact methods that seem pulled from science fiction. Laser ablation is one such theoretical frontier. From ground-based stations or orbital platforms, high-powered lasers would fire concentrated beams at small pieces of debris. The intense heat would vaporize a tiny portion of the object's surface, creating a momentary jet of plasma. This tiny thrust acts like a miniature rocket engine, altering the debris's trajectory just enough to lower its perigee, forcing it to burn up in Earth's atmosphere. While elegant in theory, the atmospheric distortion of ground-based lasers and the immense power requirements for orbital platforms present staggering hurdles. Another exotic solution involves magnetic tugs. Utilizing the principles of electromagnetism, a chaser satellite equipped with powerful superconducting magnets could interact with the metallic components of a target satellite. By inducing eddy currents in the aluminum hull of the debris, the tug can generate a repulsive or attractive force, controlling the object's spin and slowly dragging it into a lower orbit without ever making physical contact. This eliminates the risk of accidental collision during capture. However, the magnetic fields required are immense, and the technology remains in the early stages of terrestrial laboratory validation, far from deployment in the unforgiving vacuum above. The lessons from that early research highlight a brutal economic reality. Cleaning up space is astronomically expensive, and currently, there is no viable business model for garbage collection in the void. Launching a single active removal mission costs tens of millions of dollars, yet it only removes one piece of trash. Who pays for this? The tragedy of the commons dictates that while a clean orbit benefits everyone, no single entity wants to bear the financial burden of the cleanup. Commercial space companies operate on razor-thin margins, and national governments are reluctant to spend taxpayer money retrieving defunct satellites launched by other nations decades ago. Economists and futurists argue that without a fundamental shift in international space law, the debris crisis cannot be solved by technology alone. The Outer Space Treaty of 1967, the foundational document of space law, dictates that nations retain ownership and liability for their space objects indefinitely. This creates a bizarre legal paradox. If a private company wants to remove a dangerous piece of Russian or American debris, they must first secure permission from the nation of origin. Without a streamlined international framework for salvage rights in space, legal red tape will strangle the deployment of cleanup technologies before they ever leave the launch pad. We are standing at the precipice of a new paradigm, one that demands a radical evolution in how we value the orbital environment. The concept of a circular space economy is gaining traction among visionary engineers. Instead of simply dragging dead satellites into the atmosphere to burn up, future missions might involve orbital recycling facilities. Autonomous tugs would gather debris and transport it to orbital foundries, where solar mirrors melt down the aluminum and robotic fabricators 3D print new structures. The junk threatening our future could become the raw material for humanity's next great leap, constructing massive solar power satellites or deep space staging habitats without the immense cost of launching material from Earth's gravity well. This vision requires us to transcend our historical mindset of extraction and abandonment. The AGI and advanced robotics required to orchestrate an orbital recycling ecosystem will push human ingenuity to its absolute limits. But the alternative is a slow, silent strangulation. The debris field is not just a hazard to navigation, it is a physical manifestation of our short-term thinking, a monument to a civilization that prioritized rapid expansion over long-term sustainability. The challenge of clearing the skies forces us to confront our own technological adolescence. As we look toward the commercialization of the Moon and the eventual colonization of Mars, the orbital space around Earth will only become more congested. Mega constellations consisting of tens of thousands of communication satellites are already being deployed, dramatically increasing the statistical probability of collisions. The margin for error is shrinking rapidly. Every launch provider now faces intense scrutiny regarding their end-of-life disposal plans. The era of launching and forgetting is over. We are being forced to engineer responsibility directly into the architecture of our spacecraft. Leading astrophysicists warn that we have a narrow window of opportunity. The density of debris is increasing, and the mathematical models predicting the onset of a catastrophic cascade are becoming more alarming with every passing year. The solutions we develop today, whether they are robotic arms grappling dead rockets or international treaties mandating orbital salvage, will determine the trajectory of our species. We must transition from being mere visitors in space to becoming responsible stewards of our orbital environment. The silent void above us is no longer empty. It is a fragile, hyperkinetic ecosystem that holds the key to our technological survival. If we fail to address the unseen threat of space debris, we risk erasing the sky, turning the gateway to the universe into a lethal, impenetrable ceiling. But if we succeed, if we can engineer our way out of the trap we have built for ourselves, we will have proven that humanity is capable of not just reaching the stars, but of living among them safely and sustainably. The cleanup of Earth's orbit is not merely an engineering challenge. It is the ultimate test of our maturity as a spacefaring civilization.